Okay, so um, let's talk about that feeling. You know the one.
Yeah.
You're completely stretched too thin, right?
Yeah.
Saying yes to every single request, even when your body, your mind, everything is just screaming no.
Mm-hmm. And that quiet sort of simmering resentment starts to build up.
Totally. And pretty soon, you're looking at burnout,
Yeah.
just completely drained from constantly trying to, you know, people pleasers. Does that sound familiar to you listening?
It's incredibly common. And often you might not even connect it to a specific reason. It just feels like, well, like life, maybe.
Or like you're the one failing somehow, failing to keep up.
Right.
Exactly. And the material we're diving into today, it gives us some really vivid pictures of this, like Erica's story.
Oh, yeah, Erica.
She's a single mom, and she was actually doing great at work, getting promotions, praise.
But at home.
A completely different situation. During this really busy tax season, things just started to unravel. You know, dishes piled high, laundry mountains, zoning out online. Yeah, zoning out, kids eating frozen food all the time, and she felt totally thankless at home, just burned out. So much so that the author, Nedra Glover Tawwab, says she was kind of unintentionally on strike from her own home life.
Right. And Tawwab points out that Erica eventually had to realize, she couldn't be the rock star doing absolutely everything. She had to start asking for help.
Delegating,
Maybe hiring help, getting friends involved with the kids, letting go of doing it all.
Then there's another example, Kim. She went to therapy just feeling chronically overwhelmed, like she was drowning in tasks and the mental load.
Just trying to cram more and more into a life that was already overflowing.
And what came up in therapy?
Boundary issues. Big time.
And that really is the absolute core message from Nedra Glover Tawwab's work that we're exploring today. These feelings, the overwhelm, the resentment, the burnout.
Yeah, she makes it so clear they often stem directly from not having healthy boundaries in place.
And the powerful takeaway, the thing we really want you to hear, is that setting healthy boundaries, it isn't selfish. It's actually essential for finding peace.
Peace in your life, peace in your relationships, it's fundamental.
And that's exactly what we're trying to do in this deep dive. We're pulling out the key insights from her book excerpts, trying to understand the why and the how of setting boundaries.
Really extracting those valuable nuggets for you, the listener, especially if you're nodding along thinking, yeah, that sounds like me.
Okay, so let's start with the why. How do you actually know if you need boundaries? Nedra talks about several signs, and she even mentions a viral Instagram post.
Oh, that post really struck a chord because it listed the signs so clearly. Things like feeling overwhelmed constantly.
Yes, that's huge. Or feeling resentment towards people just because they ask you for help.
Or avoiding calls because you suspect they're going to ask for something. We've all done that, right?
Totally. Or, maybe you catch yourself making little comments like, oh, I always help everyone, but does anyone help me?
Feeling burned out. That's another classic sign.
Or maybe finding yourself daydreaming about just vanishing, disappearing somewhere quiet, away from all the demands.
Yeah, or just realizing you have absolutely zero time left for yourself. None.
If any of that stuff hits home, Nedra says that's a pretty strong signal. You likely need to take a look at your boundaries.
And she goes deeper than just the signs. She talks about the real impact, the cost of not having boundaries.
Right. Like one of the first things to go is usually self-care. Poor self-care.
Yeah, we hear that oxygen mask analogy all the time. Put yours on first. Sounds simple.
But in reality, when we're juggling everything, trying to please everyone, our own basic needs, sleep, decent food, just a quiet moment, they get pushed right to the bottom of the list.
And Nedra is really firm here. Self-care is not selfish. She actually frames saying no as a vital act of self-care.
An act of self-care. I like that.
It's about saying yes to your own well-being, not just to survive, but so you actually have more energy, more presence to give to others when you choose to. From a place of being full, not empty.
And this ties directly into mental health, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The author notes pretty starkly, actually, that anxiety, for example, is often deeply connected to things like, unrealistic expectations we put on ourselves, people-pleasing.
And that inability to say no, you mentioned.
Exactly. She says for many clients she works with, that specific inability to set limits, it's the single biggest trigger for their anxiety.
Wow. That makes a lot of sense, though. If you're constantly agreeing to things you don't have the time or energy for, your brain's just going to be buzzing with stress and worry.
So learning to set a reasonable limit, saying this is what I can manage, becomes a really practical tool for managing that anxiety.
And that feeling of being overwhelmed we started with.
That's another huge one. It's more than just being busy. It's that feeling of drowning. Drowning in tasks, your mind constantly racing.
Trying to figure out how to fit it all in.
Yeah. Nedra calls this constant busyness endemic in our culture. And she points out that our well-being is often the price we pay. Boundaries help you figure out what's actually manageable for you.
Okay, and then there's resentment. That feeling. Ugh.
Yeah, she paints a clear picture. Feeling taken advantage of, frustrated, bitter. It comes directly from not setting limits.
And it just poisons things, doesn't it? Your relationships.
It breeds conflict, makes you maybe a bit paranoid, builds walls. You end up doing things out of obligation, not because you want to. There's no joy in it. It's just heavy.
So the why is really strong. These aren't just small annoyances. They hit our mental health, our physical health, our relationships.
Which brings us right to the next question. Okay, so what are healthy boundaries then? What do they actually look like?
Nedra explains that healthy boundaries are possible when, your past experiences aren't automatically running the show in your present interactions.
Okay, so it requires awareness.
Yeah, awareness of your own capacity, emotional, mental, physical, and crucially, being able to communicate that clearly.
And what does that feel like in day-to-day life?
Well, she describes it as being clear on your own values, listening to and trusting your own opinion, sharing appropriately, not oversharing, but not building walls either.
Healthy vulnerability, maybe? With people you actually trust.
Exactly. And being comfortable saying no. But also, and this is important, being comfortable hearing no from someone else without taking it personally.
Right, not seeing it as rejection.
She also breaks boundaries down into different types, which I found really eye-opening. It's not just about physical space or saying no to tasks.
Like what else?
Well, there are intellectual boundaries, like respecting that someone else is allowed to have a different opinion, even if you strongly disagree.
Oh.
Or knowing not to dump heavy adult problems onto kids.
Okay. And emotional boundaries.
That's about sharing your feelings in appropriate ways, expecting support reasonably from others, but also not invalidating how someone else feels. Not telling them they shouldn't feel sad or angry.
That's a big one. Plus, material boundaries are stacking stuff, and time boundaries, valuing your own time and others. It really covers, well, everything.
It really does. It's about respecting limits across the board. And she contrasts these healthy boundaries with two unhealthy ways of being.
Right, the extremes. Either being too rigid.
Yeah, like building fortress walls, never sharing, avoiding vulnerability, cutting people off super quickly, having really strict rules. She gives an example, like someone who might say a harsh absolutely not, to ever watching their sister's kids, just to stop them asking again, no matter the circumstance.
That sounds isolating. And the other extreme.
Porous or blurred boundaries. And this is where I think a lot of people who feel overwhelmed probably find themselves.
Oversharing.
Oversharing, saying yes to everything, the people-pleasing drive, finding it incredibly hard to say no.
And maybe kind of expecting others to just know what you need because you haven't actually stated it.
Exactly. Relying on others because you haven't set those needs out clearly yourself.
Okay, so if the benefits are so obvious and we kind of get what healthy boundaries look like, why is it so incredibly hard to actually set them?
Yeah. Nedra really digs into this. And one of the first reasons is just lack of awareness.
You don't even realize it's a boundary issue.
Right. You just feel off.
Yeah.
That discomfort, the anger, resentment, frustration, burnout. You know something's wrong, but you can't quite name it as needing a boundary.
And then there's how we learn about them, usually way back in childhood.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Kids naturally have boundaries, don't they? Like they don't like certain foods, or they might pull away from a hug from someone they don't know well.
Totally natural. But caregivers, sometimes without meaning to, can teach kids that those limits are not okay.
How? Through their reactions.
Yeah. Insisting a child eats food they clearly hate. Forcing hugs, go on, give Uncle John a kiss. Shaming them for saying no, like, don't be mean.
Or dismissing their feelings, oh, stop fussing, you're fine. Or even giving the silent treatment that the child doesn't comply.
And what that teaches a kid over time is that their feelings don't matter, or their preferences aren't valid, or worse, that saying no or having needs makes them somehow bad or difficult.
And that leads right into one of the biggest hurdles now, fear.
Fear of how the other person will react.
Exactly. We play out these worst-case movies in our heads. They're going to be so mad, it's going to be awkward, they might just stop talking to me.
And Nedra gets that the fear can be real, especially if you have a history with someone who does react badly.
But she makes this really powerful point. If you let that fear stop you from setting the boundary, you actually victimize yourselves further.
Wow. You sacrifice your own needs to avoid a potential negative reaction from someone else.
And right there with fear is guilt.
Oh, the guilt.
Feeling guilty just for having wants and needs. So common.
Often learned from those manipulative tactics sometimes used in childhood, right? Like a parent saying, oh, I'll be so sad if you don't do this.
Or being called mean or selfish just for saying no or disagreeing. That sticks with you.
It really does. But Nedra's message here is so important and, honestly, empowering. It is healthy to have boundaries. They're a sign of healthy relationships, not a threat to them. And she even says, if setting a perfectly reasonable boundary actually ruins a relationship, it probably wasn't a very healthy or stable relationship to begin with.
That's a tough one to swallow sometimes,
Right.
but yeah, important.
So, okay, we understand the why, the what, the why it's hard. How do we actually do it? How do we set boundaries clearly and kindly?
The key word Nedra uses is assertiveness. It's that middle ground.
Not passive, not aggressive.
Exactly. Not passive where you just deny your own needs. Not aggressive where you're demanding or attacking. Not passive-aggressive with the silent treatment or snide remarks. And not manipulative using guilt.
Just direct and respectful.
Direct and respectful sharing of your needs. She uses that great analogy from Pretty Woman, Vivian's character.
Oh, yeah. I say who, I say when, I say how much.
Exactly. She sets her standards, and crucially, she walks away if they aren't met. That's assertiveness with action.
Okay, so how do we channel that? What are the steps?
Nedra breaks it down into 3 main things for assertive communication. First, be clear.
Simple and straightforward.
Yep. Mind your tone, calm, direct. No need for complex words. Just be precise about what you're saying. Maybe take a breath first.
Okay. Step 2.
State your need. Clearly say what you need or what the boundary actually is. She gives examples like, when we disagree, I need you to speak in a calmer tone, or it's important to me that we stick to our plans. If you need to change, please let me know at least a few hours ahead.
Very specific. And the 3rd step.
Deal with your discomfort because, let's be real, you will probably feel uncomfortable, especially at first.
Acknowledge the feeling, but do it anyway.
Exactly. That discomfort doesn't mean you're wrong. It just means you're doing something new, something challenging for you. Push through it.
Okay, clear, state need, deal with discomfort. But then what? Is that it?
Ah, no. And this is maybe the most critical part Nedra emphasizes, tying back to that Vivian analogy. Communication isn't enough. Action is required.
You have to back it up.
You absolutely have to uphold what you said with your behavior. This is where it gets real.
So, using that example, you told your friend you need a few hours' notice if plans change.
And they text 5 minutes before you're supposed to meet, asking to push it back an hour. You can't just sigh and say, okay. Not if you want the boundary to stick.
So what do you do?
Nedra suggests you gently but firmly uphold the boundary through your action. Maybe say something like, oh, I was looking forward to seeing you. Unfortunately, changing things this last minute doesn't work for my schedule today. Let's find another time next week.
Oh, that takes guts, especially the first few times.
It really does. But she's clear. Honoring your boundaries with consistent action is how people learn you're serious. It teaches them how to treat you by showing the actual consequence or lack of one if they ignore the boundary.
Okay, but what if they don't just accept it? What about pushback? You set the boundary clearly, assertively, and they argue.
Right. Nedra definitely acknowledges pushback is super common, especially if you're changing an old pattern in a relationship.
And she sees it often as their fear coming out.
Yeah, fear that things are changing, fear of being pushed out of their comfort zone, the one where your lack of boundaries maybe worked out well for them.
And what does that pushback sound like?
Oh, it can be pleading. Are you sure you can't help? You always help me. Or guilt tripping? That's not fair. Or, well, I have needs too, you know?
She also mentions limit testing, right?
Yeah, like someone saying, okay, fine, but I'll check back later just in case you change your mind.
Yeah.
Basically hoping to wear you down.
So how do you handle that? When they test the limit or pushback?
She gives really clear steps. First, be clear about the behavior. Actually name it. It seems like you're testing my limits now, or this feels like pushback.
Call it out. Okay, then.
Express how it makes you feel. Use an I statement. When you don't respect the boundary I set, I feel. Disrespected, frustrated, ignored, whatever it is.
And finally.
Restate the boundary. Yeah. And this is key. Nedra advises doing this without further explanation if possible.
Why no explanation?
Because explaining it all over again just gives them more ammo to argue with, to pick apart, to try and talk you out of it. Just calmly, firmly state the boundary again, and don't let the violation slide. Wow, that requires real perseverance. Setting it once might not be enough.
Definitely not. You might have to repeat yourself. Maybe they genuinely didn't get it, or maybe they didn't believe you because you caved last time.
But the message is, you can always try again. Don't let one awkward conversation stop you. She tells that story about needing to tell a guy she wasn't interested.
Right, she tried avoiding him, being passive.
But finally, just saying it directly, "I don't like you that way, please stop calling," worked instantly. Because it was crystal clear.
Directness, that's the theme. Fuzzy boundaries don't work.
Okay, so we've really covered a lot of ground here. We looked at why boundaries are just so vital, preventing that overwhelm, resentment, burnout, protecting your well-being.
We defined what healthy boundaries look like, those different types, and contrasted them with being too rigid or too porous.
And we dug into why it's so hard, not always being aware, things we learned as kids, and those big blockers, fear and guilt.
Then we got practical. Nedra's strategy for setting them assertively: be clear, state your need, deal with the discomfort.
And crucially, back it up with action. Follow through.
And finally, how to handle that pushback and limit testing: name it, say how you feel, and restate the boundary. Firmly, kindly.
And the big payoff, the reason we do all this sometimes uncomfortable work.
It's what Nedra emphasizes constantly. Healthy boundaries are how you make sure you're actually happy and well, in your life and in your relationships.
They aren't walls to shut people out.
No, they're like instructions, clear instructions for how to be in a relationship with you. And setting limits like that, she says, won't break a healthy relationship. It should actually make it stronger.
And it's interesting, she also notes that boundaries can change. As you change and grow, what you need might shift.
And that's okay. You can update them, refresh them, maybe even relax old ones that don't fit anymore.
But sometimes, if you've been clear, you've acted assertively, and someone just consistently refuses to respect your boundaries.
Yeah, the author suggests that accepting that reality might sometimes mean, for your own peace, needing to create distance or even let that relationship go.
It all comes back to valuing yourself enough to protect your own peace, doesn't it?
Exactly. So if there's one single thought, one simple sentence from everything we've talked about today, something to practice really internalizing, maybe even saying out loud to yourself, let it be this, right from the heart of Nedra Glover Tawwab's message.
It's okay to have needs.